Alright, hear me out. I realize this video is long as heck, and it's basically a vlog, so there are timestamps below for your convenience. I think this story is huge, even bigger than most people seem to realize, but I also think that everything I've seen on it so far sits somewhere between incomplete information and full-on rage bait. So I did the half a week of research myself. I compared sales and market valuations and what subsidiaries and studios and publishing rights each company owns, and what is actually known about the South Korean company who was allegedly trying to take over Kadokawa before this rumor ever kicked off, and everything in between. So if you're looking for the Sony Group Kadokawa Corporation buyout video with actual research behind it, you've arrived. Welcome to hell! So Reuters reported on Tuesday that Sony Group Corporation was in talks to acquire Kadokawa Corporation. While this was little more than a rumor with two anonymous sources, two companies with no comments to offer, and a ludicrous surge to new all-time highs in Kadokawa's stock price, Kadokawa confirmed the following day that Sony has indeed shown interest in just such an acquisition, perhaps most likely confirming the rumor or leak in order to stabilize their stock price, at least giving their stockholders something other than uncertainty and market volatility based on rumors. To quote the most important line of their statement, the company has received an initial letter of intent to acquire the company's shares, but no decision has been made at this time. End quote. So to start with some interesting context I first discovered lurking in threads around the topic, there are two seemingly relevant key events and ongoing events respectively worth pointing out. Allegedly! One is that Sony helped From Software, one of the many subsidiaries of Kadokawa, to buy the rights to Elden Ring from Bandai Namco a few months ago. And while that's certainly less important in the larger context, it seems relevant nonetheless as a recent and seemingly mutually beneficial business favor between the two corporations. Sony owns 14% of FromSoft already, and Kadokawa owns 70%. And to just quote Bellular News,
Sony owns the IP for Bloodborne and Demon's Souls, but if they did acquire FromSoft, it wouldn't be a complete total free win, and that's because FromSoft bought back the Elden Ring IP from Bandai Namco, seemingly using the investment that they received from Tencent and Sony.
The only IP that would be left outside of Sony's control after this hypothetical acquisition would be Dark Souls itself, which is apparently still owned by Bandai Namco.
3 weeks later.
Prizes just keep coming all night long.
Jeff, if it's like that, keep it all night long too. Keep it coming, baby.
Brand new standalone game. Please watch.
Whoa. Jeffrey?
Bro, Jeffrey.
Back-to-back shots? Jeffrey, what are you doing, Jeff? Whoa. This looks like Elden Ring.
I get Shadow of Colossus vibe immediately. Yeah, because you see those Titans in the background? Yes, sir.
This looks like Elden Ring.
Yeah, it has a little bit of that vibe, yeah.
Looks like,
but I think Elden Ring looks a little better. This doesn't look bad though.
Oh, we gonna get another Elden Ring DLC, bro. I could be convinced.
He's got a standalone. It's not Elden Ring. It's not Elden Ring, but it looks like it. I'm saying.
Yeah.
Very From Softy. It's very From Softy. Okay.
Okay, wait a minute. It might just be though.
Hold on. Stop! Holy. Again!
Dion, hold me, bro. We're going back, Dion. Dion, we're going back. Wow, bro. When does it end? When do we get paid? Okay, hold on. The running looks crazy. The running looks crazy. We're on a fucking bird. We're on a bird.
And the Genshin Ring. They actually made Breath of the Wild good.
Gosh, bro.
I'm tapped back in. Co-op? Wait, what is this? Wait, this is like, wait a fucking...
Bro, wait. It is looking nuts. What is this?
Elden Ring Nightrain is a 3-player co-op, not a live service game, boss rush-esque with clear
It's over with, nigga.
Second, and far more relevant, allegedly, is the Kakao Corporation, a company which operates through South Korean manhwa as well as tons of other businesses, is currently the largest shareholder of Kadokawa Corporation at just under 9% ownership, with even Chinese conglomerate Tencent lagging behind at about 6%. By way of recent increases of their stake in the company, the South Korean Kakao Corporation is rumored to be engaged in a takeover attempt of Kadokawa. I've only just started digging into Kakao recently, but they are controversial online to say the least, with their founder involved in both gambling scandals as well as stock manipulation allegations. So it's time for a Kakao Corporation flashback scene. amidst a takeover bid for partial ownership of one SM Entertainment, initiated by SM's management themselves in a takeover bid specifically meant to weaken the ownership of their founder. Kakao allegedly failed to disclose their acquisition of SM shares, causing bidding competitor HYBE to back out of the bidding war after, quote, signs of overheating due to competition. By allegedly sending the price for this K-pop and entertainment company soaring above the price which HYBE had previously purchased a 14.8% stake at, as well as the price which HYBE was offering to buy out other SM shareholders, they were ultimately triumphant in what many have referred to as, allegedly, a successful hostile takeover, where they eventually walked away with 39.9% ownership, aka majority ownership, and a newfound level of control over SM Entertainment. Their chief investment officer was arrested in 2023 over allegations of stock manipulation, and their chairman and founder was arrested in 2024 over further allegations of stock manipulation in what appears to be a drama-filled, multi-year dispute that I frankly don't have enough time to research to exhaustion. Now, a few things for the record. Neither one was found guilty, and Korean regulators did ultimately approve the deal with quote-unquote conditions to assure they didn't abuse their newfound level of market share in their broader sector. Also, I think no matter who won the buyout, it would have been seen as controversial given the level of combined market share they would have attained. Also, all three of these companies seem to be riddled with various degrees of controversy, so I don't want to paint this as strictly black and white or anything confirmed with legal standing. I mean, I also saw comments floating around, highly upvoted comments, saying things like, literally don't care how Kakao did it, just glad HYBE didn't gain this much market share. And you have to keep in mind the reality that not only would this have been controversial either way it went, there are also, well, fanboys of each of these corporations and the K-pop groups they own floating around all over the internet, helping to shape the narrative of this arguably ongoing story. Everyone's got their own opinion about what happened here and what we should think of it. Blah blah blah. The point is, Kakao has the highest current stake in Kadokawa, they are highly controversial online, they're surrounded by scandals, and the story of their previous acquisition only grows stranger the more you read about it. Also, they're relatively speaking massive at the equivalent of around $11 billion in stock valuation. They already own the largest Korean music streaming service, apparently the most popular Korean social media and messaging apps, and tons of other subsidiaries in the Korean entertainment sector as it is. Once again, the story feels like it probably needs its own multi-day research session, but I'm going to stop there before I find another rabbit hole and this video gets even longer. So yeah, this is obviously at least somewhat speculative on the part of the Kakao Kadokawa takeover rumor itself, but this does seem much more complicated than most immediate reactions seem to convey. I mean, talk about a rock in a hard place. Allegedly! Would you rather Sony continue to expand their sort of anime pseudo-monopoly in English-speaking regions back into their Japanese home turf, as well by acquiring all of the various subsidiaries under Kadokawa, many which exist in sectors outside of streaming and outside of anime, many which exist within the broader industry that Sony has yet to gain a stake in? Or would you rather this massive controversial South Korean social media and entertainment company take over this absolute staple of the anime, manga, and light novel industry and see it cease to exist as a Japanese-centric entity? Hell of a run-on question, I know. Once again, this is clearly speculation, but it seems reasonable enough and certainly furthermore complicates the situation. I, of all people, almost find myself rooting for the Sony anime buyout if it means Kadokawa remains a Japanese company. And I hate Crunchyroll, as anyone who watched my last video on them knows. Now, some theorize that Kadokawa actually came to Sony for help defending against this alleged takeover themselves. There are also theories floating around that the initial leak of Sony's interest in acquisition could have been intentional on the part of Kadokawa, meant to raise the stock price to deter Kakao's buyout amidst Kadokawa's negotiations with Sony. The greatest hope, as some others have said, would of course be that Kadokawa ultimately walks away with its independence, a higher stock valuation, and investments from both companies, yielding a higher overall resilience to potential stock buyouts through its new, higher market share. Which pretty much sounds like 4D chess, I know, but yeah. I don't know. This is all highly speculative. The only real problem with the theory about them walking away independently, in my opinion, is this. Say Sony does come out the other end with, not full ownership, but 10 or 15% of Kadokawa Corporation stock, and just enough to snuff out Kakao's rumored ambitions for the time being. Do you think Sony is just going to stop accumulating shares? Why? They've already got a $120 billion stock valuation, and the Western branch of Sony continues to be massively financially successful as well. Well, for the most part. I've also seen people raising the question, wouldn't Japan's trade regulators come in and stop a hostile takeover from a foreign competitor anyway? But I've also seen people claiming that Japan recently passed laws that allowed for buyouts to occur more easily within the country. I would assume that this would all basically come down to the discretion of Japan's version of a Federal Trade Commission or a trade regulator, but I don't understand Japanese law. If someone else does, you should drop a comment below. I don't necessarily just want to be all doom and gloom about all this, but let's also just move on with the presumption and consideration that Sony does proceed to buy out Kadokawa in full, not just partial or majority ownership. Since my research, as you'll see, gave me the impression that it is entirely possible.
It's entirely possible.
And that it could be a massive shift in how Sony operates through the anime industry, globally speaking. I'd like to preface this, however, with a lesser silver lining of hope, which I will then proceed to tear down brick by brick as the video proceeds, but still. I'd like to first preface this with at least a vision for how this could be at least better than the alternative. I'd also like to point out the possibility that the buyout occurs and little to nothing changes. The lesser positive outlook here would be to say that the Japanese branch of Sony could simply be ensuring that Kadokawa remains Japanese owned and will simply allow them to continue doing their own thing, so to speak. I'm not sure that I buy that given Sony's recent track record with companies like Rightstuf and Funimation, but it is a distinct possibility if they value these assets and this broader medium as they currently exist and do not consider any of them to be redundant. Now either way, am I saying that I like this news in any way? Absolutely not. I think it's bad, really bad. Just maybe not the end of anime and everything else bad. I see a lot of commenters floating around who seem straight up fatalistic about the anime industry as a whole, and I see a lot of people well known for their optimism also feeling very pessimistic about this, so I want to at least try and temper myself against just contributing to that negative feedback loop, unnecessarily and without basis. I'd like to bring things back down to earth a little bit, and basically just lay out the facts and the numbers as I found them. So sit down, take a step back, close your eyes, and take slow, deep breaths. We're cooked, bro. So Sony Group Corporation, not to be confused with the US branch best known for gaming and most infamous for all of the anime game censorship, or the Sony Pictures Entertainment who independently owns Crunchyroll through a joint venture with Aniplex. No, the sort of all-encompassing head branch of Sony, which is headquartered in Tokyo but also technically owns all those other US companies anyway, that Japanese-based head branch of Sony is poised to buy out Kadokawa Corporation. But what exactly could this mean? Who is Kadokawa? Who do they own? What sectors of the industry do they engage in? And how do they compare to other publishing powerhouses in Japan? Kadokawa is a Japanese publishing company who has their hands in not just the distribution of anime, but all sorts of different tangentially related mediums and products. They engage with manga, light novels, and anime, as well as figures and merchandise, and a lot of stuff that's just totally unrelated to the anime industry as well. They publish a lot of just normal books. They also own a few anime studios outright. They directly fund and produce anime themselves, many of which they have majority ownership over. This season alone, I see 10 shows crediting them as producers, most notably being ReZero. They also, however, own the rights to other popular IPs, perhaps most notably of all being Overlord. I'm not sure exactly how the ownership works for all of these, but they also publish Mushoku Tensei, Konosuba, Oshi no Ko, 86, Classroom of the Elite, Data Live, and yes, Sword Art Online. They own Studio Doga Kobo and have a 31.8% stake in Kinema Citrus. They own Bookwalker, Comic Walker, Anime News Network, Trash Taste. No, seriously. They own Geeks Plus, who owns Trash Taste. They also co-own Yen Press. They own a ton of random subsidiaries and subsidiaries of subsidiaries. Certainly too many to list here, so I'll just try and show a page on screen. Kadokawa is, relatively speaking, massive, but certainly not the most massive Japanese publisher. According to Statista, they were the third largest in terms of sales between 2021 and 2022. Kadokawa brought in 128 billion yen, Kodansha brought in 170 billion yen, and Shueisha, owner of Viz Media, was at number one to no surprise at 195 billion yen. I could be missing something here. Not all of these companies are publicly traded, so I can't compare stock valuations, but this ranking seems mostly consistent with other sources I checked, placing Kadokawa consistently around the third largest of Japanese publishing companies. Their stock market cap currently sits at 585 billion yen, falling around 5% the day after Tuesday's near 20% surge to all-time highs. As for how that compares to the head branch of Sony, 585 billion yen translates to just under 4 billion USD. Sony, on the other hand, is worth 120 billion USD. So, much as I kinda hate to say it, I see little reason to believe Sony wouldn't have the funds to make the deal happen. Yo, so I just wanted to cut in for a minute to say that this was a massively reductive oversimplification of the question, can Sony buy all of Kadokawa's shares if it needs to? So obviously there's some text on screen, and as you can see, you look at Sony's operating cash flow and income and they both look fairly healthy. But then you head to their website and check out their full financial report. You look at just their cash and cash equivalents at the end of that same fiscal year, and it's closer to 13 billion USD. And that's a little less impressive. But it just means that most of their money's at work, right? Well, let's look at their total liabilities, and it's the yen equivalent of
225,486,321,764 United States dollars and 50 cents.
Oh right, I forgot. All of these tech companies take on massive amounts of debt and liabilities to make sure that number go up. Anyway, once again, that's just to say that this is more complicated than I made it sound. Growth-style tech companies are typically heavy in debt. The tech sector has broadly experienced mass layoffs following what I view simply as unsustainable goals set after the quarantine bump, and economic conditions are obviously varying levels of shaky all over. If Sony doesn't have the liquid assets lying around somewhere, they might have to take on even more debt to make the full purchase. And then there may be the question of, say, finding a bank to approve the loan. Do shareholders approve of taking this loan and making this purchase? Will Kadokawa shareholders attempt to resist the takeover? It's a tad bit more complicated. There's also a surprisingly decent article over on IGN by one Wesley Yin Poole, arguing why it would actually be difficult for Sony to make the full purchase. I'm just going to read an excerpt from that to further counter my initial point about Sony's relative size and to give some more context. Quote, as Sony's pursuit of Kadokawa rumbles on, financial experts have said the PlayStation maker may find it hard to buy the entirety of From Software's parent company. Japan's Toyo Keizai, via Automaton, reported that Sony may be put off the deal due to the cost of having to acquire all of Kadokawa rather than the parts it's actually interested in. Kadokawa is reportedly only interested in doing a deal with Sony if it buys the entire company. Sony, however, is reportedly only interested in extracting assets related to anime and video games, which presumably includes the developer of Elden Ring. Buying all of Kadokawa would cost 640 billion yen, or approximately 4.3 billion US dollars, according to expert estimates. Sony's cash for buyouts is apparently tight at the moment due to investments made elsewhere. As a point of comparison, Sony bought Destiny developer Bungie for 3.7 billion USD back in 2022. The studio has since suffered multiple rounds of layoffs and project cancellations. There's also the apparent prospect of a bidding war that would cause Kadokawa's sale price to soar beyond Sony's limit. The alternative is for Sony to buy 50% of Kadokawa and turn it into a subsidiary it doesn't wholly own. And I'm cutting the article short, but end quote. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of that, as I think Kadokawa makes a wonderful extension of Sony's media empire, but it's nice to have some counterpoints here. And back to the original script. So I guess that's Kadokawa in a very basic, by-the-numbers nutshell. I think the most important takeaway is that if Sony is successful in this acquisition, they won't just own their anime distribution and streaming services, which they damn near have a literal monopoly on in the US, as well as all the other companies we'll discuss in a moment.
Now that's a lot of damage!
They'll also own manga publishers, light novel distributors, more figure and merch producers, multiple major anime studios, and perhaps a few less prestigious ones. Tons of popular intellectual properties, including ownership and publishing rights to some of the most popular light novel series in the world. They'll certainly have more leverage than ever before to exert their will in production committees, at least on a mid-sized basket of seasonal shows, and they'll also own Spike Chunsoft and a few other new developers, including From Software. And of course, that last part is all most people are talking about. Gamers, am I right? So, why would I be worried about this? Seems like a goofy question, but, well, Sony already owns Aniplex, and without going on another tangent, let's just say that Aniplex is huge in and of itself, with its own basket of massively popular IPs, as well as ownership of both A1 Pictures and its spin-off Cloverworks Studio, and a lot of project partnerships with Shueisha, apparently. Sony has a death grip on US anime distribution through its subsidiaries, with HIDIVE/Sentai being their only real US competition. You could argue Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, but let's be honest, it's kinda silly to even count those, and that's not a lot of competition. Like, let's be honest, as much love as I have for them, their physical releases especially, the reality is that HIDIVE has been receding their services from a lot of foreign regions, and the reputation of their app has been pretty abysmal, leading me even to typically just open HIDIVE in a third-party casting app instead. And I mean, at least you can do that with HIDIVE, but still. Also, Crunchyroll's parent company is worth $120 billion. HIDIVE/Sentai's parent company isn't even worth $2 billion today. Sony also has a largely unspoken but sizable share in European regions as well, in recent years acquiring Crunchyroll, Funimation, Rightstuf, and by extension Nozomi Entertainment, VRV, Wakanim, Kaze, Manga Entertainment, Anime on Demand, and perhaps some more that I'm forgetting in European markets. Some of these they still operate through, but many simply got axed or absorbed, or their leadership was placed inside another company, because why let the greatest physical anime distributor of all time continue to exist and make money under your umbrella when you can just try and force everyone to use your own store?
Hey everyone, my name is Jake. I'm the marketing manager here at Rightstuf Anime, and I am with Sim, our warehouse team lead. We're going to show you some of the extreme conditions your package can go through that should never actually happen, but can happen, and why you should shop with Rightstuf Anime. Sim?
Here you go, Jake.
Thank you very much, Sim. We're going to take this over and hand it off to Jordan now, so come with me.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Nothing. Not a dent, not a scratch. Just one more reason that you should shop with RightStufAnime.com. When we package, we care, and we mean it. Thanks a lot.
And then soon after, they merged Rightstuf into the Crunchyroll store. At that point, things went quiet. I personally didn't really touch the Crunchyroll store. I had hopes that they were going to still use Grimes, Iowa, and nothing there would get touched. An end to an era had passed, and life moves on. Then, one day I had an itch. I decided to take a leap of faith and buy something from Crunchyroll store. A lot of stuff. My hope was that even though Rightstuf as a brand was gone, the soul was still there, and that hopefully Sean Kleckner instilled upon them what made Rightstuf so great. I had hope that that warehouse and distribution process remained unchanged, hoping their customer service remained unchanged. Boy, would I regret that foolish mindset. I placed 2 orders, a manga box set and an order for nearly 20 light novels and mangas. What I got was crap. What I got was inexcusable. And what I got was poor customer service. Let's start off with the manga box set. Manga box sets are very difficult to ship. I fully understand. And I understand there's going to be slip-ups. I understand there's going to be sometimes shipment damage. There's a lot of things that can happen with a massive thing that has books in it that is really heavy. The problem came twofold with the manga box set. One, barely any padding in the actual shipment box itself. For those that are not aware, when Rightstuf used to ship things, it would typically be the exterior box. Then there was about at least 1.5 inches, if not 2 inches, around every side of the product would be actual craft paper or cardboard that's cushioning it. Had just enough on one side so that it might not possibly slide around in the box. It's heavy, it's going to. So that's fine. Again, I say, it's fine. Let's just get an RMA set up. I contact them. I say, hey, it's damaged. Give me a new one. They said, that's fine, here's your label. I box it up again, I ship it out. Crickets for over 2 weeks. What's going on here? You said after a week, I'll get a shipment or notification. Cut forward another week, I ask again, they give me a tracking number, it's already been shipped, and it's arriving soon. I open up the box to this manga box set, and what do I find? The same damn box set. The same one. The shrink wrap imperfections on the top of it are exactly the same. How do I know? Because I took pictures to send to them initially. It was the same damn damaged box set. Literally, when I sent the damaged one back, RMA, they took it, looked at it and said, this is okay with this massive damage mark on the top of it and the smushed in corners. And they went and they put it back on the shelf. And then a week later, when they finally processed my replacement, they went over there and they grabbed the same damn box and they shipped it back to me. This time, I literally marked it and said, hey, please don't send me the same damn one again. You're wasting my time. It took me 2 months just to get the replacement and it be decent enough that I'm like, I don't want to bother anymore. I'll accept this, wash my hands of it. The other big problem about this whole situation the entire time is that every time I talk talk to the representative, I would get an email asking for my feedback of my service. And every single time I would tell them, it's terrible. You sent me the damaged one back. And I would send these feedbacks. And guess who responded to them? The customer service rep that I was talking to. I have never worked for a company or dealt with a company where your feedback goes to the person you're talking about. That is inexcusable. That is a massive breach of privacy right there, that your feedback is going to the person that's handling your ticket. Who does this? Okay, the manga one out of the side. I could talk for ages about the whole situation. Let's get into my other order, the nearly 20 light novel and mangas. After placing my order, got it decently fast, came in the mail. Once again, barely any packaging. The mangas and books are pretty much pressed to the side of the cardboard. They're squished in there perfectly, and then they have just this one little column of craft paper to make sure, I guess, it doesn't shift around in there. The shipping box itself is perfectly fine. The problem is the products themselves. All but 2 are damaged, and those 2 are acceptable. Like maybe a slight crease in the spine because, I don't know, maybe somebody dropped the spine like this, and thus it creased here. I contacted them. Dude, nearly all of these are damaged. What is the deal with your guys' company? Now, be truthful, I'm picky, but I had a mindset at that time that I just don't want to bother with it. If it's good enough, I'll accept it. And I hate doing that. I hate when you buy from something, you buy something brand new, and you have the mindset that, I mean, it's being shipped online, just accept it that it's good enough. I think everybody, if you buy something, it should be perfection. You bought it new, it should be new. But I was being open-minded about accepting it as good enough. These were horrible, and these weren't shipping damage. When you have 2 light novels that are stacked upon each other perfectly and they're lined up with each other, but then when you separate them, you notice that there's a massive bend crease down the pages, like it was folded like this, crammed in there. Oops, let's fold it back and let's put them together like that. These were pre-damaged. All of these, almost 20 light novel and mangas, were all pre-damaged before they were placed in the box, because the damage is impossible to be done by shipment because they were stacked on each other. Most of these were folded pages. They were smushed corners. There was tears on them. These were horribly taken care of before or after. Or similar to the box set situation, they were probably all returns that they shipped again. I contact them. Same exact customer service rep. I'm sorry to this person. I'm guessing they're the only person working there. They said that we'll either give you a refund of like 10% or you can ship it all back. I said, no, I want these. I bought them on sale. The sale's no longer there. I want these. They give me an RMA. I put them in the box, ship it out again. By the way, every single time I have to do this, I have to drive to the other side of the city just to get to a drop box. This is annoying to have to do this over and over again. I don't have time for it. The replacements come in. All but 5 are damaged in the same exact ways. Folded pages, crimped sides, smashed in spines, just horrible condition. It literally feels like I'm buying these things at a thrift store. Thrift store would give me better quality. I finally just emailed back and said, look, I gave you guys a shot. Send me a return label. I'm going to ship back all of these except for 5 of them. Give me my money back. I'm done with your store. I officially told them at that point, I'm done. And the sad thing is, and I told them about this, that second time they shipped me that batch, I opened it live on stream. I had a live stream where I'm like, hey guys, got these replacements and here we go, and went through every single one of them. So live on my channel, there's no faking it. This is exactly what I got. I didn't bin these, I didn't damage these. This is what they sent me. This is the quality you get from this. This is brand new. The key points here, because again, I want this to be a positive thing. I want Crunchyroll store to do better. I want whatever happened to Grimes, Iowa after that was sold to Crunchyroll, whatever happened in that warehouse, undo whatever you did. Just do it! I'm 99% positive. From a perspective of somebody used to actually buy materials and managed a lot of that kind of stuff for packaging, amongst other things that I was doing at my old job, this is a cost-cutting thing. There was no way that Sony would see how much they're paying for their shipping materials and say, keep doing that, because the customers are happy. They're gonna say, no, be like Amazon. Just throw it in a box it doesn't even fit in and ship it out. If there's a problem, we'll just refund it. That's horrible. And additionally, how many times they have to deal with having to ship this stuff back to the publishers or whatever, or the losses that they get from returns and going, oh my gosh, it's damaged, we got to throw it out, and that's a loss. No, stick it back on the shelf. Key points here: in order to save this storefront, in order for me as a person to continue to buy from it, some key things need to happen. Again, undo whatever you did. Get back the old Rightstuf packaging system. Check your products before you ship them. If it's damaged, sell it for discount on the website or get rid of it as a loss. Companies can write stuff off as loss. Never, ever, ever ship damaged goods to your customer. Don't ship your customer returns. Just because one customer has a damaged good does not mean you try to hoist it off to the next customer and hope that they accept it. That's so disrespectful to your customer.
Be a man, do the right thing.
The main key thing here is that if Sony or Crunchyroll wants to be the center point of all the anime fandom, if they want to be the give all for the fandom, if you love anime, you come to us, treat your customer better, treat your goods better. You can't treat the anime fandom like you treat your typical Marvel movie fandom. You don't just slap a Blu-ray into an envelope and send it out to your customer. Anime fans are collectors. We love collecting things, and thus we want our stuff to be collectibles. You have to make sure that your goods arrive properly. Additionally, don't give your feedback to the customer service reps. The people in charge of the customer service reps are supposed to look at that, and they're supposed to contact the reps about it. And don't reveal the identity of the customers themselves. If that's what happened, you're not supposed to tell them who said it. Customer goodwill is hard to build. It's extremely easy to destroy. You should take every order with some certain amount of care. Create processes that have very few areas where it can go wrong. And start throwing crap off of forklifts again, damn it. Anyhow, that is my experience with Crunchyroll Store, and again, the sad reality that I have given up that Rightstuf as a heart still exists there. Again, I had that hope there because Rightstuf has been distributing for them for the longest time, and I thought that they would continue to be the same way even going forward. And apparently, Sony, Crunchyroll got their hands in there. They literally had to have gotten their hands in there because with 4 different shipments, this much problems, it's utterly ridiculous. If people are looking for alternatives, Barnes & Noble, that's mainly for like light novels and mangas. Anything outside of that, like Blu-rays, I'm probably just gonna have to go to Amazon. I probably have a lot better luck with Amazon. At least getting returns and replacements is not a hassle there. But again, I hope that somebody at Crunchyroll Store or Sony itself hears this. Take the feedback. Understand what I'm saying. Understand that I want you to do better. I want to be able to send people to a place where they can buy stuff. I have no allegiances to a specific site. No matter what people think of Sony or Crunchyroll in general, if they have a good site and they offer good service, I don't care. I want it to do good.
Sony has been in recent years blatantly and unabashedly pursuing, at the very least, a clear pseudo-monopoly in US anime streaming primarily, but also physical distribution to a lesser degree, but more globally. Gutting services that were objectively better than what they offer in the case of Rightstuf, and trashing the Funimation brand even though it meant sacrificing the rights to hundreds of shows. I guess just to avoid any English-speaking market redundancies or the existence of competition even under their own umbrella? Love or hate Anime News Network, but they too will almost certainly cease to exist under Sony. After all, Crunchyroll News already exists. How many others might prove redundant to Sony? For all the benefits you might argue Sony has had on certain parts of the industry, their subsidiary Aniplex produces and or publishes tons of great shows. I'm happy to admit that. But on many fronts, they have actively worked to make things worse. On the physical distribution end, I absolutely believe that they've slowed down markedly in what they offer over time. I'm not going to get into the weeds trying to prove that, because I discussed it at length in my Crunchyroll is Killing Media ownership video, but I think you get the point. And the problem, once again, is that if they are successful in this acquisition, they won't just have their essential monopoly in US anime streaming as well as Aniplex, and many UK distributors which they've already bought out. They'll also have a fairly sized slice of essentially every tangentially related medium or product in Japan itself. They'll have expanded from just the English-speaking market to the Japanese market, likely with an eye on further globalization. And hey, obviously there are pros and cons of both globalization and the sort of mainstreamification of anime. I love the sorts of dynamic production values we're able to get at the peak of modern shonen fights today, and I wish that more regions just had access to legally streaming anime, and I've learned from reading the comments here that many people at the very least functionally don't, and in some cases they don't at all. Beyond that, I've become aware of how many languages just get the short end of the stick in terms of distribution made for them. I get it, there are lots of potential pros to the continued proliferation of globalized and more mainstream anime distribution, but anyway, just giving the devil his due. Sony will also have some more of those well-nurtured intellectual properties that both CEO Kenichiro Yoshida as well as CFO Hiroki Totoki have spoke about investing in.
But even well-known IP that could be worth millions in sales and revenue is being left to rot. Despite owning Infamous, Jak and Daxter,
Please say Killzone.
Killzone, Resistance,
Yes!
and Sly Cooper, to name a few entries in PlayStation's sprawling dormant library, Sony CFO Hiroki Totoki recently claimed the company lacks enough original IP to consolidate itself as a true gaming powerhouse.
Yeah! It's fucking so stupid.
And they won't actually have to nurture them themselves, so obviously all of this makes sense as a business decision and as something that Sony would most certainly greatly desire on both the anime and yes, the video game front, even without the Kakao rumor on the table. I don't see any reason why they would hold back in an attempt at such an acquisition. It seems brain dead obvious to me that they would want this very, very badly. Now obviously I worry that with this further growing sense of monopolization and globalization, I fear innovation may stagnate. Expectations for the actual quality of service may sink even further than they already are, given the increasing lack of competition. And there may come a time when there's no real reason not to just jack sub prices up, but I feel like that line of reason is fairly obvious. This is the part of the video where I was also going to talk at even more length about anime censorship. Still going to talk about it for a while.
They keep talking! They just keep talking!
As I think the level of consolidation that could be occurring here warrants some serious discussion of its possibility. But the topic is highly misunderstood and would ultimately require many extra tangents to fully cover, some of which I left in anyway, but I'm going to relegate some of those tangents to other more targeted video projects, primarily why I do indeed think that anime censorship has generally gotten worse overall, so look forward to that. But anyway, with the further globalization of anime, you wind up with productions which must at some level cater and or market themselves to different regions with different various sets of rules and even cultures, as well as appealing to ratings boards, also with various different sets of rules, to get your production to the broader audience, globally speaking. And with more and more regions to appeal to as the medium becomes more global, you're forced to make a choice between producing the development of many alternative versions of a show for different regions, or leaving certain regions out altogether, or just having the studios bake all of the censorship and avoidance of sensitive topics in at the source to avoid all of that extra work and money spent. And doesn't it feel like we've seen a lot of that lately? I'm not saying I think no studio has ever made the decision to go the way of censorship themselves, but I would imagine in most cases it probably comes from on high, not from an artist. The latter path of pre-baked censorship that cannot simply be removed later is of course the greatest fear in my opinion. And call it paranoid, but with a Sony who owns the largest worldwide anime streaming service, multiple major anime studios, distribution all over the world, and ownership of many of the source materials, and therefore positions as investors at the table of production committees where the real decisions and the real money is made, well, I think you can see how this could, not necessarily will, but certainly could go terribly wrong. With this now massive, increasingly high-risk stake in the industry, an ever more global industry which they would now have an even more global stake in, I believe they would be even more incentivized than ever to globalize that much further and push as hard as possible into countries like China, given their massive audiences but horrendous censorship policies.
More recently, Netflix's Arcane is seeing some of that Chinese censorship, outright removing the relationship between Caitlyn and Vi. So in the Netflix version, we've got Vi and Caitlyn all close. Comparatively, in the Chinese version, they've completely removed Caitlyn from that part. Then there's the part where Caitlyn rests her head on Vi's shoulder in the Netflix version. The Chinese version, just missing. Vi's just gone. Apparently that air in China is real dense. And then we've also got this example where Vi in turn rests on Caitlyn, and of course in the Chinese version, nope, none of that. It wasn't just in China though. Talking about the Iranian censorship, where it looks like various female characters have this new t-shirt edition. Can't have women showing too much of their arms apparently.
And worst of all is that if it were to work really well and make a lot of money, it might set the new trend, so to speak, for the broader markets. That's not even to get into the bigger worldwide context of downright despicable things like American payment processors attempting to censor certain anime-related sites through denial of access. Now I know that there are definitely a fair share of people who don't really think censorship and all that is really that big of a deal. And there are definitely a ton of people today who only watch quote-unquote basic action shows and maybe the generally wholesome rom-coms or something like that, and not much else. And I have nothing against those shows or those viewing habits. Watch whatever you like. And as long as you're not guilt-tripping or morally grandstanding anyone else, don't let anyone make you feel guilty or cringe or whatever over it either. But in my opinion, the fact that there is still such an absurd sense of variety that many people find it almost impossible to even parse what they're looking for out of it all, the fact that there are still examples of uncensored shows and shows full of things that large subsets of people on both sides sides find uncomfortable is actually probably the truest proof that the medium still holds some relatively miraculous level of creative freedom, and I'd like it to stay that way. Also, the question of what should be censored in anime is like the most brain-dead obvious common sense example of the slippery slope in existence. Setting the arguments of it's not real aside, setting aside the argument of the ages of fictional anime characters essentially boiling down to meaningless, shallow marketing towards their core demographics, often in shows where it doesn't even make sense visually or based on the show's plot, setting aside the fact that the quote-unquote normal live-action media is full of the same stuff but for real, often with actual underage actors as opposed to the 40-year-old women voicing anime. Setting all those aside, even though those are perfectly valid arguments, who in the world decides at what point something like the fan service or the gore becomes inappropriate? And if we allow it to be treated as some sort of grand moral dilemma in the more extreme cases, how long before someone says, well, based on that logic, and if this matters at all, shouldn't this other thing be considered inappropriate as well? Also, do you think the same things will be considered appropriate in every region and culture? No, and they won't be the same whether we're talking about fan service or talking about gore, or we're talking about taboo or radical or progressive themes. And that's not even to mention the fact that these things always eventually swing back around. Maybe they hurt the right now, maybe they hurt the left when things swing back around, and clearly they're hurting both right now if you're paying any attention, and none of it should be censored, no matter who on what side of what culture gets into their feelings about it. This is certainly also something I'll talk about more in bigger future videos, but I am personally of the mind that, well, I like anime for what it is in reality and has been in the past, not for some idea of what anime could or should be if it were a more broadly accepted global medium. I like my anime, well, anime. I like it full of a variety of both broadly appealing shows and shows with weird ultra-specific appeals. I like it weird, quirky, culturally Japanese, often lewd, offensive, sometimes beautifully unrealistic, and occasionally, of course, the exact opposite of all of that, pure and relaxing, especially in the case of my favorite slice of life anime. But generally speaking, I just like it totally unfiltered, and if I wanted to push it in one direction or another, I would hope for it to continue to become more unfiltered. And I think the best way to help assure that is to continue pushing for there to be many sources for the material that you're looking for. Personally, perhaps above all, I don't want anime to become the video game industry. Some idea in the mind's eye of a bunch of corporate businessmen who are looking towards more global aspirations, which will almost certainly end up sanitizing and culturally globalizing the medium. I have little interest in the version of anime that exists in the minds of people who wish that anime was more normal or acceptable or easier to talk about, or the version of anime preferable to censor-happy countries and so-called modern audiences, if such things do in fact exist. I don't want anime to be normal. I don't want it to be maximally acceptable. I don't want it to be westernized. I liked what anime was when I was growing up, and I still like what it is now to a large degree. I hope that it continues to be just as weird as ever, just in different ways, as it has been in different ways throughout the decades and the changing trends. The last thing I want is for the broader medium itself to be catered and transformed into something that some CEO thinks that billions of people in a more general audience will find more broader appeal in. Anime should remain weird and novel and Japanese and even unpredictable to the uninitiated. And yes, I'm saying that the fact that there is still so much material in and around the anime industry which makes people on both sides angry and uncomfortable on the internet is indeed proof that it is still, relatively speaking, a creatively free medium. Also occasionally creatively bankrupt, but let's ignore that for now. It is also worth quickly noting one more tangent, for absolute transparency, that as many anime-specific censorship debacles have been blamed on Crunchyroll or Sony themselves, up until this hypothetical future scenario where either might sit on major production committees, I haven't seen a case where it actually made sense that they could have done so themselves. The production committees license out a certain version of a show, typically the same version licensed out to TV broadcasters airing essentially in parity with streams in Japan, and also probably somewhat affected by the different regions they have to get approval for distribution in, with the only exceptions I've personally ever heard of being uncensored versions of shows airing on premium Japanese TV broadcasters like ATX.
個別の出資会社の権利配分がいわゆるなんだろうな、今コメントで株主って流れるけどその通りなんだよ。株主としての影響力がある範囲、つまりその集められる金の中で出資率3割とか4割っていうのをキープしないと絶対に他の制作委員会の面々の声がでかくなってさ、企画はアンコントローラブル、いわゆるコントロールが取れなくなってきちゃうんだよね。で、制作委員会とは何かっていうと、アニメに出資するおじさんたちのこと、出資するおじさんたちのこと。例えば、音楽や声優を担当するレコード会社とかね、あとフィギュアやおもちゃを担当するおもちゃ会社、 あとそれを放送するテレビ局とか、原作を連載する出版社、そういうのが出資者としてアニメの制作委員会に名を連ねると。
Outside of simply saying that I wish Crunchyroll would fight for things like uncensored versions of footage and versions of footage devoid of things like ghosting and dimming for their streaming platform, where many of the different regional rules and Japan's own laws really don't matter, where these things are obviously unnecessary, there isn't actually much merit to this ongoing Crunchyroll anime censorship narrative that plays itself out in many of the rings of AniTube that I typically find myself agreeing with. Honestly, I think the companies probably just prefer to release in parody, instead of relegating the best version of a show only available on a forum platform while your own TV broadcasts remain censored. I think that's probably the actual rationale, beyond simply selling more Blu-rays or some form of marketing, but that's purely speculative. Not saying Sony isn't guilty of specific cases of censorship through their subsidiaries, they absolutely 100% are on multiple occasions, including some anime video games that go uncensored on Nintendo of all platforms. But I don't want to accuse Sony Japan or Crunchyroll of things that there isn't real evidence for, so...
Hi guys, today I wanted to talk to you all about what I believe to be probably the biggest cultural shift that we have ever seen.
On the flip side, the sliver of hope would be that as the anime industry conglomerates underneath the weeaboo promised land, the culture might instead shift back to a pure production of anime in Japanese media. One which simply respects what it is in all of its Japanese-centric appeal, all of its glorious weirdness, unquantifiable variety, and unfiltered nature. Not some generalized idea of what it could be if it were more sensitive and better filtered for the preferences of people who wish that it was easier to filter out the stuff that makes them feel uncomfortable, or the anti-freedom and bleeding heart cultures and governments, whether they sit on the left or the right, or just the lowest common denominator. I guess I could just say that. Maybe by some miracle, they might actually even positively incorporate AI and in-house Japanese employees to do the localizations themselves, and dub shows using Japanese to English voice banks, and completely and utterly take back anime from all these filthy normies, tourists, activists, and bakagaijin of all varieties. And if it did, maybe it might go well and maybe it might go terribly. It's just a little bit difficult to be optimistic about it all when facing the reality that companies ultimately tend to just want to make more money through more sources. And they're obviously once again going to want a return on this investment after however massive and therefore potentially risky a purchase this might be, so crap, I was supposed to be positive, wasn't I? Look, a decent bit of the forward prediction is pure speculation, and it's entirely possible that this deal doesn't even go through. I think it's worth pointing out the worst case scenarios because this purchase is massive, and in all of the shallow rage bait and sad reaction vlogs flung around over this news, I've seen many of those exhausted by the rage bait reacting with thoughts that it can't possibly be that big of a deal, that nothing could change. So the worst case is worth talking about.
But when it comes to anime, it's still a Sony Japan thing. And Sony Japan knows what to do because they've been doing anime for the longest time. They have Aniplex, they have all these major, massive studios like A1 Pictures and Cloverworks. They are huge in anime. This is their bread and butter. They know this brand. They're not sanitizing their properties. I mean, you have like Ayakashi Triangle and stuff like that. They have plenty of lewd content out there. Kaguya-sama Love is War. Did you check out that OVA? I love that OVA. They're not hiding from this stuff. They're not sanitizing their stuff. But I do agree with people, and this is my biggest fear, is they get so big, they kill the competition. And I know for a fact that Sony is very globally focused. That's why Crunchyroll is doing as well as it is, and it's basically streaming globally right now. They have a global focus. What comes to global focus? Making sure that it falls within the lines of every single country. And there's a lot of countries, not US, that like their stuff very clean, no violence, no nudity, don't even show skin. And I think everybody always focuses on, you know, the whole woke aspect in the United States, but it's like, this is China we're talking about. Like, these are these big, massive countries and developing countries that do not like a lot of what's in anime. And it's a two-parter. It's one, if they gain full control of a lot of these biggest properties and the biggest publishers and the biggest IPs, at the same time, also grow more and more focused on a global scale, eventually their focus becomes one, and what happens there is a lot of stuff gets changed that we don't want to see changed. Will Sony, just like they did with PlayStation, eventually move their focus for anime towards the West, just like PlayStation did? They eventually got it so big and it became less about Japan and more about the West. Not that it wasn't selling in Japan, it was selling more elsewhere. So what does that do for a company? We're making more money over here, let them do it. Let them handle it. They're obviously in the area that this is focused in, no doubt. If anime suddenly started making at least 51% of its sales in, I don't know, Europe, guess what anime's focus would be? Europe. It's already happening technically right now globally, because right now globally licenses are making more money for the anime industry than domestic. But even though anime money making is globally selling more than domestic in Japan, there's still this other aspect that's still keeping that control, which is the source material. That's where the money is being made for a lot of these companies, is the source material. That's their focus. So they want to adapt it in a way that sells the source material. That might eventually not happen there. Eventually they were going to get to a point where global's more important. And that's the fear, because then Sony's going to pivot real quick. Sony doesn't care about global domestic stuff. They care about the money. Now, every company, same way. It's just that Sony has established the ability to do global.
Do you suppose there would be a way around that without...
What I would want, and what will probably happen, what I want is they just make, versions that will be in tiers, basically. Make ones that will be fine for them and ones that'll be fine for everybody else. But they're not going to do that, obviously. They're going to make one for everybody. I think Rama 1/2 right now is probably an example of that, making it to where it's fine for everybody, which sucks. But again, I acknowledge that's, again, probably was their goal to begin with when they made it.
So
because again, even in Japan, they don't want to see nips on the screen.
So you think the tiered system would probably be the best solution?
Right, because they know, not so much in Japan, but Crunchyroll has to know, for the ability to globally distribute these titles, they have to know what's allowed where. A really good example is not just nudity. When Tokyo Revengers came out, they made a global version. What happened with that global version? They got rid of the swastika. It's not a swastika, it's a manji symbol, but they got rid of it because it's a reversed swastika. And there's a lot of places where it's legally not allowed to have a swastika, and they didn't want a manji symbol to be seen as a swastika. And so, due to regulations, they had to do that. They didn't have to, they probably could have explained it, but they're afraid of it. And there's no telling that it could pop up on a television mirrored or something like that, and then bam, they're going to see a lawsuit. They're going to be in trouble. That's just something that's not allowed in Germany. My hope, like I said, to your point, is that you would have multiple versions, but from a money making or from a money saving standpoint, they don't want to do that. That's the troubling thing. We see that a lot right now because there's a lot of domestic and global versions of a lot of anime, but will they keep doing that?
Well, my question is, rather than shake it down to its root and just hope for the best that everybody can accept it, I would lean more towards giving the most to the most amount of people. I don't want to see a Square Enix problem where they tried to AI censor everything and was instead censoring needs.
Oh, the manga uproar was? Yeah.
I think that was an attempt at trying to solve the problem. It failed miserably, but it tried.
Yeah, they had a lot of content to kind of go through, and they just made an AI do it probably, and they probably fixed all that stuff, but it just went to show you that skin wasn't going to be allowed on that. And again, what they said with that, we want to make it available to every country.
Exactly.
Countries that don't let that happen.
That's the thing, is trying to find solutions to these problems is where we need to go, rather than bring it down to its common denominator. Rather than censoring it for certain countries, let's just make it all censored so that nobody gets anything. It's the bad kid in class and we're ruining it for the entire class.
Mess it up for everybody.
Yeah. I get it. They don't want it. Fine. Don't give it to them. But that doesn't mean that I don't want it. I do want it. And I would much rather you make a special version for them rather than make a special version for everybody.
I know a lot of people are once again feeling fatalistic, and I want to say that I'm still feeling very optimistic for the anime industry, as optimistic as you can be. And not just for my endless backlog. I'm seeing a lot of people saying that if this happens, they're gonna stop watching anime, and I cannot follow you, my friend.
I love Japan, period.
I still see great potential for a relatively positive path however things go, even if it means we have to deal with a period of some negative trends. I'm of the mind that with art and entertainment, the reality is that things are always changing, and eventually they do just kind of cycle back around to something like what once was, or just something new and totally different. I don't think that this is necessarily some death blow, and I think that if those of us who care continue to support passionate productions and niche distribution services, especially those which embrace the pure, unfiltered nature of anime, we will continue to get at least some of those shows. Yes, I'm reminding you to pre-order the Blu-rays for Gushing Over Magical Girls. It's back on sale again, baby. No, but seriously, really funny that of all things sold out even in the US.
I thought that was interesting.
Anyway, the point is, we have to be the demand for whatever it is we want to see, especially if what we want to see is not more broadly liked or broadly considered acceptable. And I'll talk about all that in more detail in just a moment. Because this is, of course, once again, the part of the video where I'm supposed to give you some magical solution to this insane and almost unquantifiable situation. Now, I'm not going to go on another massive slur-filled tirade about why, if If you dislike these decisions, you should obviously just cancel your Crunchyroll sub, idiot-proof your computer using my guide, learn how to use a search engine like someone with an IQ above room temperature, pirate the shows you lose access to using a casting app like Web Videocast or a Plex server, or whatever if you want to watch on TV, and find other methods, most of all more targeted methods, to support the industry, because I already have that video. 2 of them even, which I think go together pretty well if you're interested. But the obvious line of reason still stands that if you don't like what Sony is doing, even given whatever you think of the strange speculative context involving Kakao Corporation, you should probably stop giving them money or something. Otherwise, we will get and we will deserve exactly what we tolerate. Yes, if you want a company to stop doing something you don't like, you have to stop giving them money. If you want smaller, currently less significant companies to become real competition, you have to start giving them money. And if you want alternative donation options and generally more targeted physical methods of support to continue to proliferate throughout the broader industry, you have to support the ones that do already exist until they become more attractive to other studios and to other companies. Above all else, if you want the specific types of shows that you love to continue to exist and get sequels, you actually have to support them in some meaningful form or another. This is also not me bashing piracy, of course. I love piracy, and I think it should continue to exist with a symbiotic relationship to official sources. It is necessary that it exists, and it is frankly probably the only legitimate form of archiving that exists. Not that Blu-rays and hard drive servers aren't absolutely effective as well, but
at the start of the video I mentioned the 87% number, and that's from the video game availability study that was prepared in 2023, sponsored by the Software Preservation Network and the Video Game History Foundation. Now they found that yes, 87% of all video games produced before the year 2010 are not commercially available. That is real worrying. Now you might think of GOG, right? You can buy loads of old games there, but again, we're talking about ones that are not commercially available, so anything on GOG doesn't actually count there. But in fairness to GOG, they're trying and they just launched a preservation program, but they can't do it alone, not even close. A pillar of the ESA's argument, right, is that publishers of games need legal protections that other art forms don't, and they're specifically using the legacy market. 87% of legacy games before 2010 are not commercially available. One of my favorite games of all time is Freelancer, right? It's impossible to purchase Freelancer legally, and I don't have my original game discs. So if you like Freelancer, well, I'll leave you to figure out how you could resolve that problem. But it sucks. Even for the industry, it sucks. I'd pay. I would pay. It's a game that I love. But it's not just about me being able to relive a childhood game. Per the Video Games Heritage Foundation, quote, the ESA's position forces researchers to explore extra legal methods to access the vast majority of out-of-print video games that are otherwise unavailable.
Nothing else even comes close to piracy in functionality and effective archival, and if you know, you know. There are some shows and some movies which you can only obtain the ideal mastering and encoding of through the high seas. Not that I don't think that there are some companies doing a great job of that today, but I got a lot of comments on my last video bashing Crunchyroll and essentially promoting a combination of piracy with other methods of supporting the industry, mostly in more targeted ways. I got a lot of comments on that video that amounted to, imagine paying for anime ever, as if to say that they only and exclusively pirate anime, and I am not with you on this. As a wise bro who is now a lady once said, I strongly believe in try before you buy, but try before you buy only works if you actually buy the things that you love.
Over the years, a lot of studios have crashed and burned or turned to low-budget pandering shows because they couldn't recoup their losses on more ambitious projects. Now, there's no doubt that a lot of the troubles the anime industry faces are the result of difficulties in adapting to modern paradigms of viewer consumption. We're in an age where everyone has access to everything whether they want to pay for it or not, which is why studios have to rely on dedicated customers more than ever. More and more shows are dependent on products than on selling DVDs of the show itself because so many people will simply download the show. And I'm not saying that we should go back to the old models. Personally, I think DVDs and Blu-rays are dying storage mediums, and I certainly don't believe in the old model of the US anime market, which was to blindly buy DVDs on the off chance they might be good. Try before you buy is a model I believe in strongly, but it only works if people do in fact buy. Anime is a Japanese colloquialism.
I understand that not everyone has the money, but you don't need to go as crazy as I have. You don't have to go broke with it. I have slowly collected a pile of anime Blu-rays over the years. I have t-shirts. and hats, and pajamas over there in the closet, a couple of roll-up posters, art books, also back there on the bookshelf, manga. I have a High Dive sub, which I once again usually use with the Web Video Cast app, not the official High Dive app, and I subscribe to both Studio Trigger and the Animator Dormitory project on Patreon, hoping to see more projects like them emerge, ideally. I also support and follow a few more independent projects, but those don't necessarily count for our purposes today, or do they? A little more on that later. I am also not wanting to, at least in this video, just guilt trip people in one direction or another over their Crunchyroll sub, especially given how complicated this story actually seems to be. It's your choice, and their Blu-rays are kind of unavoidable anyway. I mean, are you really not gonna buy Bocchi the Rock on Blu-ray?
Come on, man, what are we talking about?
But any talk of voting with your wallet must be prefaced with a long overdue rant. A lot of people seem to think that the idea of canceling your Crunchyroll sub, pirating, and supporting in other ways is tantamount to pulling the plug from the one and only true savior of the anime industry. And more importantly, the workers. This is, in my opinion, fueled by nothing but a metric ton of moral grandstanding, misinformation about how the anime industry works, the need to justify one's purchase, and of course the simplicity of being like 3 buttons away from watching an anime recommendation on your PlayStation. Yes, to be fair, anime as a broader industry is absolutely making more money today through streaming licenses than through BD sales. The sheer number of subscribers is difficult to argue with. However, the anime industry runs on what is known as a production committee system, which is by all intents and purposes designed to cap budgets and more importantly keep investments in the hands of the same relatively small groups of companies and out of the hands of the studios themselves. They take all of the risks of investment and so they keep the rewards.
Money that's lost to piracy, it just would not go to the animators. Let's take a closer look at CODA, the Japanese Anti-Pirating Association. Let's look at the members. Oh. Well, would you look at that? These are not animation studios, except for Studio Ghibli, I don't know why. These are the production committee members.
Animators are paid by a studio, typically on a contract or paper cut / paper drawing style system.
But when it came down to like doing the keyframe animation, I sat in front of my computer for 8 hours straight.
When it comes to anime work, the pay is per cut, right? Not per hour?
Not per hour, yeah.
Woo! Can you break that down for the audience that can't really like wrap their heads around that? And maybe like do a difference between like American animation and Japanese anime.
For the most part, in America, for animation, we are paid by like the hour. So we have hourly rates, which are determined by our animation union. I think like as a storyboard artist, the most you can make like on a week is like $2,400 per week before taxes are taken out. So that's like up in the like upper 40s, low 50s range, if I'm doing my math correct, like per hour. For anime, you're paid by the cut, you're not paid by the hour. So a lot of the times in anime, the cuts are like sort of like a flat rate and they can change depending on things like, are there a lot of characters in there? Is there very complex background animation? Or oftentimes what I've experienced is the deadline is so short, that's why they're paying more. That shot I just talked about where I spent 8 hours on, it was like 10 seconds long at least, but I only got 2,500 yen for that cut.
What the heck?
It's 10 seconds. I worked on it for 8 hours. I'm pretty sure everybody watching this can like go on their calculator and do the math. Like, wait, what? So that means per hour you were making this?
Dude, I feel like people on like Fiverr for like the freelance animation, they're getting paid more.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised. I guess I understand if like the standard of living in Japan is more reasonable than California, but even then I feel like in comparison to like American studios, like I said in my video, that's like not even borderline, like you're starting to break laws, like labor laws in general.
制作委員会方式が良くないっていうのは聞くんだけども、このメカニズムの上では良くないんだけども、その代わり日本ではかなりいい加減なアニメの企画も通りやすいってこともあるんだよね。
Not that America is any better. We also have our like loopholes and how we don't want to pay artists and stuff.
Why do animators accept that then? I mean, for Japanese animators, I know for a lot of them, it's like a means of survival, so they don't really have a choice. But for like freelance animators, are they just doing this for like a resume builder?
I think the motives kind of differ in a way because I guess like depending on where you live, it works for you. There are definitely some people who do it for resume. There are definitely some people who just do it for the clout. I think the unfortunate truth is that we do it because we're so passionate about it. And I think the studios and companies have been very good at using that and exploiting us at the end of the day. And this is just like animation as a whole.
Animators are paid by a studio, typically on a contract or pay-per-cut/pay-per-drawing style system. And studios are paid an agreed upon price by said production committees. It's contracting work pretty much all the way down. In the vast majority of cases, studios do not sit on production committees, which are composed mostly of investors, producers, IP holders, merchandisers, and distributors, and rarely the studios unless they are adapting an IP they own, or it's a special case like Chainsaw Man, where MAPPA funded the entire production themselves.
で、制作委員会とは何かというと、アニメに出資するおじさんたちのこと。出資するおじさんたちのこと。例えば、音楽や声優を担当するレコード会社とかね、あとフィギュアやおもちゃを担当するおもちゃ会社、あとそれを放送するテレビ局とか、原作を連載する出版社、そういうのが出資者としてアニメの制作委員会に名を連ねると。で、それぞれが権利を主張したいんだよね。権利っていうのはどういうことかっていうと、権利を主張するっていうのはさ、例えばさ、そのアニメに対して 3% しか出資してなかったら 3% しか発言権がないんだ。なのでみんな 3% とか 1% の出資は嫌がると。もっとたくさんしたい。ジブリのアニメなんかさ、制作費が30億とか20億とかかかるわけなんだけども、制作委員会見たら本当言えば20億とか30億の出資なんだったらさ、出資会社が予算なんだったら出資会社が100も200もあってもいいぐらいなんだよね。でもなんでそんなにないのかっていうと、ということになると、これさ 50% 出す、でも5000万までしか俺は出さないとなったら、この人が全部の予算、総予算を1億って決めちゃうわけだよね。現場は2億かかります3億かかりますと言ってて、マーケットに聞いてみたらこれ必ず売れるよ、2億かけよう3億かけようというのが分かってても、このプロデューサーは作品を思い通りにしたいがために予算を1億で抑えることが最も合理的な行動になってしまう。でそうなるとこのアニメっていうのはどんなにヒットするのが分かってても上限予算、天井が作られちゃうんだよ。でこれを例えばいやいやうちも出しますうちも出してもうちも出して全部受け入れると青天井ポーカーという状態になってしまう。青天井ポーカーっていうのはさ、ポーカーやってる最中にレイズレイズレイズレイズって言ってどんどん掛け金を積み上げちゃったら当たり前だけども金を持ってる人間が勝つことになっちゃうね。でそういうふうなことをさせないように普通ポーカーっていうのは天井というのが決められて掛け金っていうのが決められていると。それと同じようにアニメーションっていうのも今天井が決められていて、でそれは何かっていうと談合状態で、これまでにそのアニメーションを作ってたり、あとは放送局の局のプロデューサーとかさ、あとおもちゃ会社のメジャーどころのおもちゃ会社のプロデューサーとかが自分たちが一つの作品に出せる金額の上限が決まってるわけだ。それが2000万円だったとしたら、うち2000万円しかできない、でも権利は絶対に 10% 欲しいとなると、2000円が 10%、2000万円がごめんね2000万円しか出せない、でも 10% 欲しい場合は2000万円が 10% になるように、その劇場用のアニメの予算の上限は2億円になっちゃう。しかしそういう場合普通はね1000万出資して他の会社がわーっと出資して合計何億になりますって、これが映画の制作というのはそういうふうにやるんだけども、日本のが特殊なのはさ、一業種一社という業界慣例があるんだよね。これがさアメリカとかだったらケナーとマテルとあとハズブロが3社おもちゃがスター・ウォーズのところに申し込んできたら全部受けるんだよ。でその上でそれぞれ出資いくらできますかって割ってって、じゃあハズブロさんはフィギュアやってください、ケナーさんはなんかアクショントイやってください、マテルさんはじゃあなんかなんだろうな、ホットロッドやってくださいみたいにして分けるんだけども、日本はそういう制作委員会内の揉め事を極端に嫌うんだよね。つまり偉いおじさんたちが、さっき言った金出したおじさんたちが顔が潰れるのを極端に嫌って、よそから出されたおもちゃでうちが出したおもちゃよりもヒット商品出したらそいつの担当のなんか顔が潰れちゃうから、一業種一社という不思議な取り決めしちゃう。そうすると制作委員会の人数は割とこじんまりして、いつも同じようなメンツになって、 でみんなが出せる金額もお互い分かってくるから、そうなると一つのアニメの予算なんてみんな上限決まっちゃうわけだよね。
Because the studios are not part of the sort of investment class, they do not actually receive residuals as you might think they do, but they also don't take on the risk of going bankrupt over a dud or two. Outside of those rare productions where studios sit on the production committees, all of the money is made by licensing out rights to distribute these series or merchandise them, and any residuals that are earned make their way back to the investors, which make up the production committee, once again, not the animators, and not the studios. There are exceptions if you look for them, but they're very rare and mostly only exist in a handful of specific studios who function in, for the anime industry at least, a very unconventional way. Anyway, even with the anime industry growing like crazy, to my understanding wages have been mostly stagnant for the actual workers.
ここでこの間話してたチャイナマネーの話ね。もし中国の会社が10億出すと言ってきたらどうなるのか。中国の会社が10億出して言ってきたらそれを断ったりはしないわけだよね。まあリスクが減るからありがたい。しかしそれを10億を本当に出してしまうと、例えばそのなんだろうな、アニメ10億出しますと言ったらもう制作委員会方式だとその中国の会社が全部出資できちゃうわけじゃん。そうなると旨味がないので、どういうふうに考えるのかっていうと、例えば国内の DVD の販売権は欲しいとかさ、商品化権は欲しいとか、海外に売れた時の配分が欲しいってみんな思っちゃうわけじゃん。損したくないから。なので最低さっきも話したように 10% とか 15% の権利配分がやっぱこれまでの会社が欲しいってなってくると、中国が10億出しましたある会社がいた時にその10億を丸々使おうとしないんだよね。全てをその10億を20に分割して5000万円かける20口にするんだよ。で5000万円かける20口にして一口5000万の出資というふうなことで他のものの中に混ぜちゃうわけだよね。そうすると20個の企画がどんどんこう増えていって、まあポートフォリオ分投資みたいなもんで20個の企画が増えていって、で一つの中国の会社の出資率が 30% ぐらいに抑えることができると。5000万だったら。でこれがその今アニメーションがひたすら増えてる原因だよな。なんで予算がない、現場が苦しいと言ってるのにアニメの制作本数がこんなに増えるのかというと、実は日本のアニメっていうのはヒットするのが分かってるから世界中から出資が集まってんだよ。しかしその集まった出資で1本あたりの制作予算を増やしちゃうと、海外の出資が配分が多くなっちゃうじゃん。1本あたりのアニメーションの中の6割とか7割の資本が海外資本になっちゃう。別にそんな現場はねそれでも全然困んないんだよ。ただこれまですごい貧乏してたんだから、その金を出すのがアラブだろうがドバイだろうがさ、中国だろうがインドだろうがどこが出そうが、とにかくまともなギャラが欲しいわけだよね。でもそうじゃなくてそれを分割して日本の制作会社が簡単にハンドリングできる予算の青天井を決めちゃって、いやこれまでお前ら1000万で作ってたんだから1000万で作れるだろう、これまでお前ら2000万で作ってたんだから2000万で作れるだろうと。でそのうちチャイナマネーを使ってリスクだけ減らすようにしてるんだ。つまりこれまでやった2000万やったものを2500万とか3000万に上げないんだよ。そうじゃなくてその2000万の予算のこれまで通りの予算の中で1000万を中国から来た出資で割ってリスク負担させて、残り1000万で自分たちの費用分担を減らそうとするんだよね。それによって他の企画にもっともっとなんだろうな、いっぱいお金出そうとしちゃうんだよね。結果ひたすらアニメーションの企画が増えるばっかりになる。出資すべき金はいっぱいあるんだけども1本あたりのアニメーションには全然お金が増えない。そして横の方にお金が縦に流れて奥の方のスタッフまで行くんではなくて横に流れて上の方ばっかりで滞留することになってしまうわけだ。すげえよね。アニメーションっていうのは儲かるし将来性があるからさ、世界中のからお金が集まるんだけども、一つの作品の予算が上がることはこの理由でないと。本来こんなアニメに2000万出すべきじゃねえよっていうような企画も通っちゃったりするから、これはまあよし悪しなんだけど、今日はあえていいもの悪者っていうのをちょっと考えて、設定して話してみました。
Once again, animators and staff in general tend to work on contracts, and animators are typically paid based on how many cuts they work on, basically pay per drawing or pay per cut. They don't sit on production committees, and they don't get a kickback from your sub. Your sub is in all likelihood simply paying for server costs, marketing, and the value of licenses, and therefore making producers and merch companies and investors, and of course Crunchyroll and Sony, rich. As well as, yes, to be fair, probably being used to quantify demand for different serializations, just as they essentially should in any other product or service in the industry. And I'm not saying that any of that's entirely meaningless, because obviously all of these help to prove demand and keep the industry afloat overall as the massive machine that it is with all of its moving parts. But it's important to ditch the high road nonsense. You are not housing animators with your Crunchyroll subscription. That mentality is a load of horseshit. Don't let yourself be blinded into tunnel vision by this mentality, and don't let yourself get morally high-horsed by others. I've seen people complain about me basically telling people not to feel bad about buying merch and BDs and apparel and not worrying so much about the subs, watching shows that you don't have access to through
extra legal methods.
People say it's goofy to think that these methods are supporting the industry in the same way, but either way, you're basically giving all of your money to licensors and investors ultimately. The one argument which I think holds some true weight is that streaming is used as a gauge of interest through analytics and viewership metrics, and that's a perfectly fair argument. But either way you slice it, whether you sub to Crunchyroll and you watch Bocchi the Rock, or you buy the Blu-ray or an official Bocchi the Rock t-shirt, brother, your money is going to the same set of hands either way. If the company's keeping track of demand for a show, don't factor these all in beyond their streaming analytics. They're literally just failing at reading the demand as it actually exists, instead of just on Crunchyroll's back-end analytics. Your Crunchyroll sub is not, and likely never will be, some magical exception to how money works in the anime industry, so miss me with that guilt-tripping nonsense in the comments below. It is for all intents and purposes exactly the same as supporting in any other way, and it is a fraction, individually at least, of what other people spend on the industry. Streaming makes more money than Blu-rays simply because more people stream than buy Blu-rays. That is the sole reason why. I mean, am I missing something here? Now, of course, your Crunchyroll sub, and you could make all of the same arguments to a lesser degree for your High Dive sub, your Crunchyroll sub is absolutely throwing you into the largest pile of general contributions, and there's certainly a merit to that. But ultimately, a Crunchyroll sub should be thought of as the basic, entry-level, lowest contribution, least targeted form of support for the industry, because that's what it is. And yes, I think Crunchyroll's claim that it's actually really effectively targeted based on what you watch as an individual is totally misleading. First off, based on Crunchyroll's own admittance, most of their recent subscriber growth is because people wanted to watch Demon Slayer, and if that surprises you, I don't know what to tell you. If you think your Crunchyroll sub gives you the power to truly support Yuru Camp just because that's what you last watched, there are 40 others voting for Jujutsu Kaisen instead, and like 44 voting for Demon Slayer, making you nothing more than a blip on the radar. And that's based on the review numbers on Crunchyroll. Not a perfect metric, but probably the best we have. All of your money is going to go into a big pile with the rest of the money, and it's going to get split up based on what is most popular and what has the highest value licenses. Now maybe I'm missing something, since most anime have basically the same budget. Perhaps the licenses are closer together, but I would assume the more money an IP is making, the more the license is gonna cost, Maybe I'm missing something, but this just seems like common sense to me. In my opinion, if you want to individually give targeted support to your favorite show, you will buy the Blu-ray, or some merch, or make a donation if the option is available, which is admittedly extremely rare, like just Studio Trigger rare. So far. Otherwise, your best bet is probably to order some merch directly from their online store if you want max efficiency. As I have in the past, I would simply like to remind you all that you do still have other options if you so choose to use them, to watch things and to support them. Speaking of those options, the biggest reason I think High Dive / Sentai is worth supporting is their physical line. The fact is, essentially everything they license has a physical version, whether it's one of the classics like Hidamari Sketch or K-On, or standard popular seasonals like Oshinoko or Eminence in the Shadow, or even their most controversial works like Gushing Over Magical Girls, Inukai-san's Dog, etc. If they license it, I can rest assured it's probably going to get a physical release, and you absolutely cannot say that for modern Crunchyroll. And what I'm saying is, if you enjoy the existence of physical anime releases, for all the issues they might have, I think they're a company worth supporting. I've also recently been buying some physical releases from G-Kids / Shout Studio or Shout Factory, I can't remember which one it is now, and Discotheque Media, who have been releasing new physical releases of many classics. There's also Kitty Media and Media Blasters, who release Blu-rays of, well, you know. As usual, there are also many European releases which I watch in my region-free Blu-ray player, which you can just get a region-free Blu-ray player on Amazon these days. I enjoy these because they're cheaper than the US ones. Pretty cool, right? Sure hope it stays that way and the prices don't get squeezed out by external forces. There are a few other US publishers whose work I don't know very well yet, so I'll just try and throw a couple on screen here. The obvious great thing about all these companies is that they're doing the work that you could not imagine modern Crunchyroll doing, remastering remastering tons of classics, releasing explicit and controversial works, and in the case of High Dive, just releasing everything they license without fail as far as I can tell. But in the case of G-Kids, they seem to actually be attempting to get their foot in the door in the case of popular seasonal shows, given that they actually hold the license to release Dandadan. I know I'm going to pre-order it the moment it becomes a reality, and not just an existing license, and I hope that it does exceptionally well for them. So like, if you see them floating around on social media, tell them that you're looking forward to a Blu-ray of Dandadan, and buy it when it drops, man. I don't know about you, but I don't want to see physical releases die, and I would love to see someone else start picking up some of the physical licenses of seasonal shows and doing some of the work that Crunchyroll doesn't seem very interested in doing anymore, and reaping the benefits. And just because it needs to be said, screw exclusive licenses. If a company wants to stream a show and not release it physically, it should be the norm to license it out to someone else as well. But anyway, personally, I've mostly been making an attempt to buy up physical copies of all my favorites because I'm feeling paranoid about their continued existence, to be honest. But another thing that I'm doing is making sure that if I see something I like that's also like maximally unfiltered, I buy it. For example, Discotek's re-release of Kite, which also sold out the day it dropped. Just to say, there's demand for all this stuff. And I want to use opportunities like these to send a message with real money behind it, not just a $10 sub, that I want to see things released physically, even the most controversial works. And once again, as a reminder, you can still directly support Studio Trigger through Patreon. And like, if there's anything that I could tell you to go do, I mean, this would be the main thing. Like, we should be the reason that studios wake up and realize that you can make more money through these donation means.
Trigger obviously wants to produce things that are on a level that they would not be able to, within the current paradigm, promote on just the back of fan funding. Now granted, they crowdfunded a 45-minute OVA of Little Witch Academia, and from there were able to expand on that universe because it had proven the worth of the IP to production committees who could fund it further. And even if that's all Patreon amounted to, I would be okay with that. But the point is simply that we got Little Witch Academia because people wanted it enough, because the vision was strong enough, and that vision was backed by the Japanese government trying to make this happen. That literally the Young Animator Training Project was just pouring money into anyone with a good idea. They poured some money into Trigger. Trigger made that good idea and people resonated with it, and because they had the rights to this IP, they were able to just crowdfund a second one, and it worked. People did pay for a double length full episode of anime. And Little Witch Academia, to me, is so much better than anything else that was coming out at the time that there is no need for me to support the anime industry. I would be happy to just support that. As Miyazaki said, even if it was only once a year that I got to see truly exciting animation, it would be worth it. It would be worth it to slow the production schedules down, to tell people you don't need to make 12 episodes of a show. You don't need to make every episode 22 minutes because you have to fill the allotted time that part of your production committee, TV Tokyo or whoever, requires you to have the episodes be this length so they can run it on their network and follow their paradigm, and therefore you have to now base your story around this idea. If we were supporting companies entirely through crowdfunding, they would have no reason to follow any of these restrictions. They could just make what they want to make.
You can do the same thing for the Animator Dormitory project if you want to help with things like animator housing and proper education from actual industry members on their YouTube channel. If you're willing to seek them out, you can even find some fan boxes and Amazon wish lists for individual animators and directors, etc. You might also look out for more independent groups who you can donate to, which there are definitely way more of than official Japanese studios currently. For example, I only recently discovered a little group called Buta Pro or Buta Productions, who I just figured I would follow for a bit, see what they were up to, and boom, they just worked on some cuts for a music video by freaking Eve. You know, the Eve who did the first Jujutsu Kaisen OP? Pretty cool, right? And one of the actual pros of how globalized things have become is that any of these independent workers or groups could have the potential to one day be a more integral part of the industry, perhaps even a healthier industry. You never know. And of course, just because I feel like shouting them out, Sakuga Blog is doing an excellent job at once again providing real education and industry knowledge, which we could certainly use more of, just across the board. And so, okay, how do I sum up some kind of overall point in all of whatever this is. Well, if you just want me to tell you what I think you should do, if you still think that Crunchyroll provides you the specific value that you're looking for, if you are undeterred by this news and you have no interest in, for example, streaming your favorite unofficial site in the premium version of the web video cast app with adblock, or watching on your PC after following my guide for idiot-proofing your computer, or setting up a Plex server or whatever and supporting through other methods, for whatever reason, if you just like the fact that you can press the PlayStation 5's power button, press 2 more buttons and be watching an anime through the Crunchyroll app or your TV, if you are getting precisely the value you were looking for, it is obviously not my place to tell you not to give them money or use their service. If you do like their dubs, I get it. If you don't care about the freedom of other means of viewing and supporting, then of course, you would give Crunchyroll your money. I get it. But if you are truly interested in supporting the industry in a meaningful way, you want to push it in a certain direction, however small that push might be, maybe you have a set of productions that you especially like and would like to see more of, if you wish that there were more productions giving favorability to studios like KyoAni and Ufotable, for example, because you think that they or some other studios are playing the game the way it's meant to be played, perhaps nudging the industry in a direction that might one day give studios and animators more leverage, then you should support their products specifically, not Crunchyroll's licensing department. I've got nothing against trying to support through subs. I just think that we should advocate way more for people to support in more meaningful ways. We should show our support through more than just one giant media conglomerate, and we should do what we can to push the envelope back towards more competition, more targeted and more various forms of support, with less of this goofy default pedestalization of Crunchyroll subs, with piracy thought of as some unforgivable act which couldn't possibly be condoned by someone who truly wants to support anime. Most importantly of all, if you want competition and you don't want a monopoly, you want to have options, you want to truly support something other than just what's most popular and most valuable to the companies themselves, I don't think you're ever going to accomplish any of that through just a Crunchyroll sub, but you're also never going to accomplish that if all you do is pirate either. And finally, I know this was probably a heavy story, so don't go watch another YouTube video about it right now. I don't think there's that much more that could be covered until we get another news update anyway. Go watch an anime that you love and remind yourself that it's there instead, something like that. I'm probably finally gonna go check out Look Back myself, since I love Fujimoto's work, and I've heard good things. Anyway, I've got another somewhat similar but perhaps much funnier and heavily edited video on the Inhin lawsuit right around the corner. Just had to address another update in that video, but it's almost done. But it's mostly just anime coverage and memes coming. God, I hope so, because my God, it is way more fun than any of this. Also, if you want to donate to me, I'm gonna try to have my Patreon functional by the time that I post this, and just thanks to everyone who got me to and past 1,000. I finally, a lot later than I probably should have actually, got the channel approved for monetization, so just thanks. It's really cool to make money off of this stuff, even if it's pocket change so far. Anyway, that's about all. Peace.
Ohayo konnichiwa. My name is Framing the Narrative, and I'd like to welcome you to the world's first annual Copium Olympics. Let the cope begin.
ANN had an article from Jerome who posted on there for their Answer Man. I think it was Answer Man. But I think his perspective was very interesting in what it could mean for the future of the properties themselves. Because let's be honest, what is this buyout for? It's to go buy properties. There's a big problem that they're kind of having right now that I would assume, and that is, okay, we can distribute, we can make a lot of money distributing, we're making all these licenses and everything like that, but they don't own this stuff. They buy licenses, but they don't own the stuff. They're always making a portion of it, and they're having to buy properties on a regular basis. They're having to pay into stuff that they're not getting all the money for. No, what owns these properties is typically going to be the original IP holders, and then for the anime itself, it's going to be whoever is given rights to that to produce an anime. And even still, when you're producing an anime, you're getting partial ownership. So when you look at like MAL or something like that for a show, and you see like 5, companies are listed there, one of them is probably getting the majority ownership, like probably 51%. Everybody else is getting like a little piece of the pie, so that when the anime is sold, they're getting a portion of it. They're putting money into it, but they're only getting a portion back. So for, Sony, they want a bigger piece of that pie. How do they get it? They own the properties. They start from the very beginning, they own it. So that's what this move is. Let's just go straight to the source and grab it completely. People do not have trust in what Sony will do. And so I think there is this is sort of a weird thing or difficult thing to kind of navigate, to kind of try to put some sort of positive spin here, because I want to see a positive here. At the end of the day, we do have to keep in mind that Sony is a company. Companies like money, and what produces money is success. They're not doing this for the sake of killing it. They're doing this for the sake because they see some gain from it. He makes a good point as well, and the idea that, what does that mean? A lot of this just turning out anime for the sake of making money from the anime industry and licensing right now is going to probably plummet. If the deal goes through, we can probably see like a sizable chunk of the anime made each season cutting down, because Sony's not going to want to produce all this garbage shows just for the sake of making more shows. They're going to be the ones deciding. They're going to be the only producers. They're the only ones that have access to all that catalog and everything. So I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's kind of where I kind of see it going if that's the case. It's essentially closing a part of the floodgate, I guess, which people can see as a positive. Hey, we don't have 60 shows a season, and most people don't even watch but maybe 5 of them. But I think, again, a really good point he brings up, and I didn't really consider this, is in the end what happens is if they do completely barricade that off, they could pass them out every now and then, but their main goal is going to be, okay, now it's all ours. And again, what that possibly could mean is that a lot of these animes that were being made every season because people are contacting Kadokawa no longer happen. And again, now you have suddenly out of nowhere, instead of like 60 shows a season, you're having now 40 or maybe even those 30. Again, we're talking about what they were producing. I think they had some numbers here, which was like a third of the anime in 2022 and 2023 was produced by Kadokawa and Aniplex. A third of it. So you're going to see at least a third of the anime possibly condensed down every single year. Now, the interesting thing that comes from that he brings up that I think is actually a really cool thing if you think about it, is what at that point is going to be Sony's focus. They're not going to keep the status quo. They're not going to go, okay, what all we have? We got to make sure that we keep those numbers up. We got to keep making, how many were we making? We were making 20 a season. All right, we got to make sure we're still making 20. No, what's going to happen is they're going to be more focused on, they're going to make sure those properties that are now theirs be very successful, because now they have a stake in it. Whereas before, Aniplex could have been contacting Kadokawa and saying, hey, just give us a show that you think will be good, or a property that'll be good. Okay, throw $2 million at that. No, it doesn't have to be good. Just make it so we can get a license out and then we make money. Now, their focus is going to be basically cross-pollination. It's exactly what we were talking about with Joen. What were we talking about with Joen? Is that focus that now they're close-knit. Shueisha's close-knit with Aniplex and, Cloverworks, and I think it was Wit Studio too. The idea there was that they worked with each other to make sure they make a great property, because they're all invested at that point in a group. That's going to happen here, is that suddenly they're going to look at their properties and go, which one do we want to be successful? Because we're going to make money from the source material too. Whereas before they were just making money from the anime, they're going to make money from the source material too. So it's a vested interest in Sony as a corporation with Kadokawa now to make a great anime that sells a great manga, that sells a great anime. And what does that lead? Sequels. This could, and again, I totally agree with him here. This could mean that you will get more focus in sequels, because they're going to want to consolidate to the best titles and make sure to keep building on those titles. Rather than starting over from one with these titles over and over again, they're going to basically take the anime and the manga and try to build them up gradually over time, meaning you probably have a more likelihood of Kadokawa properties getting fully adapted, because again, they're cross-pollinating each other and they get full benefits from both sides. They're no longer just going to make money off of selling a single season and then walking away because they're not making money from the source material. Now Sony is making money from that source material, so they're going to want to keep adapting it. Now the cross could be true as well, that of course if it doesn't sell, then they're going to stop immediately, but that's going to be the case anyway. He's being a massive cope here, by the way. I agree.
I absolutely.
But he makes a good point. Like, this could happen. I can see that consolidation, that focus. Whereas before, again, a lot of these companies that are producing the anime from these properties are just getting a quick one single season.
Right.
And they're walking away from it. They're not invested with the source material because they don't own the source material. So they're just kind of, bam, get this licensing money, sell a couple figurines, and then walk away. Look for the next title. Whereas here, again, Sony's invested because it's their company. It's their property. They want it to get big. So there's a more likelihood that they'll consolidate. And again, the bad side about that is it's probably going to mean a lot less experimentation. So there is obviously the scare there of, will all anime turn into focusing on this one type of demographic? Shonen. Seinen might actually do decently well. Sports does really well. We're possibly never going to get something that's going to be outside of those norms anymore. They're going to be more focused on, okay, what's going to be good, and let's focus on those. But Kadokawa does have a large amount of seinens. They're not just shonen. They're very focused on isekais and seinens and stuff like that. So we're going to see a lot more, hopefully a lot more creative. Not to say that shonen's not creative. Let me be careful here. It's not Shueisha here. Again, we're not talking Shonen Jump here. Technically, Jerome does bring up a good point. There's a value prospect here for Kadokawa too. It's not just them getting money. Kadokawa could technically accept this, seeing this is the best way for them to grow as a company, because going into what I was talking about earlier, that aspect of that consolidation and focusing on building up properties and helping those properties grow through Sony's
ecosystem.
Yeah, their ecosystem. They have everything we need to make these manga and these light novels blow up, and they can give it a proper job because it's going to be their properties now. Again, going into his cope about the idea of higher quality. But it makes sense. Again, it technically does say, okay, technically we are the engine. Sony has the wheels and the chassis and everything else that we need to drive down the road. Rather than us be on the side fueling it, let's just get inside there and go. There's a growth value here for Kadokawa. They, as a publishing company of all these properties and whatnot, and their studios and everything like that, they have a value here that they can grow with Sony. So they could want to do it either way.
It's not necessarily the best solution, but in other ways it is good. There is good things that come out of having monopolies. It streamlines the entire process. So you have, like Andrew was saying, a mangaka or whatever, he says, this is the biggest company, having their name behind my property gives me a lot of views. A lot of people are seeing me. That's why a lot of people want to be on YouTube. If they wanted to go to Vivo or something like that, probably not as many people are going to notice them. But if they're on YouTube, have a lot higher chance of getting noticed. If you want to make a movie, you want it on Netflix. Why? Because Netflix is where all the movies are. So you want to be on the biggest platform. So a lot of people are going to be drawn to being on Sony.
I do give credit to Jerome. It's a rare W, I know. Jerome over at ANN, his little answer band article he's pretty thorough about. I do give him credit. Again, I think that there's some of it I can go with him on, but there's some of it that's massive cope. And the whole like increased quality thing, cope, that's some massive cope there, dude. Less anime, I can see that. You made a good argument there. Higher quality, no. Because again, if you want evidence right now is you look at their own properties. Their own properties are not getting amazing quality stuff. Their own properties, yes, technically like their originals like Licorice Quill and stuff like that, really well done. I can agree there. But it's not like all their stuff is getting high quality production values and whatnot. There's still like massive amounts of issues they're still having. And it's not just a given that suddenly they get that quality. I agree with him in the mindset that they would, again, it's their properties now, and thus they have a vested interest to sell that property. And I do like his perspective on, I do believe this is sort of a sign that we are getting to that point now where we're no longer a anime sells the source material, but actually the source material sells the anime, because it makes sense. What original anime sell very well? Licorice Quill was like an absolute lightning in a bottle situation. Like, I don't think we'll ever get a situation like Licorice Quill again, or it's very rare.
You know what?
Most cases, an anime sells because the source material is already successful. And that's what Sony's after here. They want source materials that are successful.
I think you're right. I think that, when did that shift happen, do you suppose?
Where the source material sells the anime?
Yeah.
I think
because
it's sort of a...
Remember
it's a
when we were talking about it?
I think it's a perspective of essentially the shonens. I think the shonens skew us into thinking that really for the most part. I don't think it's ever been the case. I think it's a good point to make, because again, I think that's Sony's perspective here, is the idea that if Sony has everything they need to make an anime and to distribute it. Right now, Sony as a company, right now, putting aside the fact that yes, they have their own IPs, but for the majority of the cake here is that Sony sitting there currently is going, we have an ability to make an anime. We have a studio. We have the money to produce the anime. We can distribute the anime globally right now. We can sell it out to, companies to make figurines or whatever. They have everything they need except for what to make. And that's why they want to buy this company, is to get those IPs. So it shows you there that reverse effect, where we keep talking about the idea that the anime that Sony's making is going to sell the source material that they don't have. They could easily make their own IPs, but obviously that doesn't work all the time. Again, Licorice Coil was that's a massively rare occasion there. It took off. It had everything that needed to make it happen, or they market it really well. But for the most part, people want some sort of source material to be behind it, something they can sniff first and see if it's going to be good or not, and then they jump into the show. It's really the concept of a pre-established audience. And I don't think that's ever been the case until here recently, to your your question mark there, I don't think that has ever been that significant until here recently, because more and more than ever before, so many titles are getting distributed in the West. More so than ever. And it's not so much that I think we've kind of speculated before, like there's like this weird finger that these companies have on the pulse of Japan, that they know what shows are going to get adapted, so they get the publishing rights really quickly. Like Seven Seas is talking to some guy at Kadokawa. But I think it's more of a fact that their Seven Seas and stuff like that they're obviously going to be looking at what's big in Japan, what's successful, and yes, typically those are going to be the ones that are going to be getting anime adaptations, because they know that they're tried and proven properties that people enjoy reading, and they can probably bump up the sales a little bit more if they can get it to people's eyeballs with anime, and that's what happens. So Seven Seas sees that, they're licensing them, they're bringing it over here, and then that's causing the reverse effect that we're talking about here. Suddenly, the source material is selling the anime. Anime then sells more source material. And again, that's that cross-pollination that I think Sony's looking for.
I think you're right. I think it was when the source material started becoming more available to us. That's now the reverse has actually happened, where now it's the source materials that are selling the anime. It's an interesting situation, that's for sure. And it kind of just happened at some point.
And it's on a positive note, Chris.
I'm all totally doom and gloom on this, Andy. I don't know why are you expecting me.
Hold on, let me open up.
I'm the little black cloud over here, remember?
I got an idea. Let me read his final paragraph where it was like the massive Cope moment, and we'll leave it on that, right? He'll give us the Cope. Less anime in the future, but higher quality. And more long-term commitment to longer-running serials. Perhaps a great diversity of popular anime IP will gradually erode from shonen anime market dominance. And finally, it will no doubt lead to more consolidation within the Japan's anime and IP industry.
You fucking with me, right?